Welcome to the Hope for the Animals podcast, a project of compassionate living. I'm your host, Hope Bohannic, and you can support this podcast with a donation by going to compassionate-living.org/donate. Okay, so today is the final episode in a series of episodes focused on my new book, The Humane Hoax: Essays Exposing the Myth of Happy Meat, Humane Dairy, and Ethical Eggs. I believe this is the fourth in a series that have been focused on the book. Today, we have one of the contributing authors to the book, Lisa Barca, will be joining us. And her chapter from the book was really insightful. It focused on the news media and journalism and the humane hoax. So we'll be getting into all that. Lisa is also a musician, and her band is called Scarlet Rescue. And we will be playing one of their songs at the end of this episode. So that will be fun. Stick around till the end to hear the song BBQ Protest. So our Humane Hoax online conference went really well. If you missed it, the videos will be available, hopefully by the time this episode is posted, on our Compassionate Living YouTube page, Compassionate Living's YouTube page. We'll also have the videos on the Humane Hoax website, that's humanehoax.org, and we'll have videos of each of the speakers individually, so you can pick and choose what you might want to watch. So check out those videos if you missed the conference. So I want to address some feedback that we get for the Humane Hoax Project in general. And I have a feeling that people think this about the book as well. I haven't gotten that direct feedback, but I certainly get it for the Humane Hoax Project in general. So I want to address this here briefly. So the criticism goes something like this: why are you focusing on just a small number of animals on small farms, right? You need to focus on the majority of animal farming, factory farming. And I get into in the book why we actually shouldn't be using language like factory farming. And I talk about that in my chapter, and I've talked about that on this podcast. So I won't get into that, but I do want to kind of unpack this critique. There's a number of factors here. And first of all, people really need to realize that this issue, the humane hoax and humane washing, it's not just about a small number of animals. It's not only about small farms. Big industrial companies, they are using humane washing as well. They use this labeling and this marketing. Big industrial ag use the humane hoax as well. And I go into detail about this in my book, in the intro of the book, in my chapter of the book. Companies with tens of thousands of animals, sometimes on one facility, use labels like certified humane and family farms. In the book, I talk about a 2019 undercover investigation of Fairlife Dairy, a huge dairy operation whose very name implies a better life for animals, Fairlife Dairy. In these videos, this undercover investigation, calves were not only being separated from their mothers at birth, which is, of course, industry standard, no matter the label, but they were also forcefully dragged and thrown and kicked and punched and treated horribly. It was it was awful. It was hard to watch. And here's a company that claims that they have even higher standards than the usual or the average for animals, right in the name of the product. I mean, that's why Fairlife Dairy was created, to, to give the appearance of it being better. Butterball Turkey is the largest producer of turkey meat in the US, and they use the American Certified Humane label. It was predicted that cage-free eggs will be 71% of the market by 2026. That was predicted back in 2017. So the numbers may have shifted slightly, but still, it's going to be the majority of eggs sold very soon. So we're not talking about just a few animals. We are talking about a quickly growing number of millions and millions of animals that are bred and killed under these humane labels. And if we don't address it, it's just going to get worse. When someone sees a humane label, they just assume that the animal is on a small farm, right? And that's exactly what the producers of these products want you to believe. So we as animal advocates are feeding into this facade, into this falsity with this critique, right? We don't even know. I mean, that's why I edited this book so that we would know the reality that these labels do not mean it was a small farm. That is not necessarily the truth, and in most cases, it is not. And anyway, just being a small farm means nothing. Of course, there's the same inherent cruelties present in all farming, whatever the scale, small or large. There's separation of families, painful body mutilations, slaughter at a young age. None of that changes if there's just a smaller number of animals on a small farm. But if you're seeing these labels, right, first of all, there's no guarantee that the animal was on a small farm. And people just assume that. And that's what the industry wants. So that's one part of the response to this critique. But there's also a larger issue going on. There is a systematic problem that has been called the psychological refuge effect, where people justify their animal product consumption by incorrectly assuming that they're eating humanely treated animals, right? Ethically produced food. And I get into this again in the book with statistics of people when they're polled and asked, if they believe their animal products are humanely treated, most people do, right? And I believe that this could be because of these labels. So, for instance, let's say a consumer hears about the cruelty of battery cages in the egg industry and they're concerned. And so they see a carton of cage free eggs and they start buying cage free eggs. So now, instead of avoiding eggs, they can still identify as an egg eater and feel like they're helping, right? But when they go to a restaurant and they order an omelet, that's going to be made with conventional eggs. And when they go to a cafe and they get a muffin, that was baked with regular eggs. And this is exactly what the industry wants, right? Having just a few products with humane labels helps the entire industry because it gives this false sense that there's some industry-wide improvement because of the availability of these cage-free eggs that they bought at the store. But that's just not the reality. But they continue to eat eggs because they think that things are improving in all animal farming, but that's not the case. I mean, in reality, things are just getting worse. But now, consumers are being told that there is a kind and compassionate way to commodify animals for meat, dairy, and eggs. So they don't have to go to what are seen as extremes of going vegan. And I get into that in my chapter as well. They're given an option, to choose a more humanely labeled product, but they'll continue to eat animal products in all situations. So they still support the entire industry. So again, we're not talking about just a few animals on a small farm. We're talking about a systematic problem, a systematic issue that can lull consumers into possibly eating more animals, thinking that they're doing the right thing, that the industry is reforming, when the reality for the animals is basically unchanged and incredibly bleak and tragic. Okay, so I hope that helps to address that issue. I feel that this is exactly what the movement needs to be focused on now. This is going to be our moving forward, our big, big problem that when all things are labeled humane, then what do we do? Right? This needs to be addressed. So that's why I edited this book. So let's get into our interview with Lisa, one of the contributing authors. I really enjoyed this interview. I hope that you do too. All right, I am thrilled to introduce Lisa Barca. She is a lecturer in the Honors College at Arizona State University, where she teaches humanities and writing courses and seminars on the ethics of humans' relationships with other animals. Her current research centers on critical animal studies, media ethics, rhetoric and ideology, and the intersections of feminism and animal rights. She holds a PhD in the Romance languages and literature and is a contributor to the volume Meat-splaining, the Meat Industry and the Rhetoric of Denial, and now a contributor to the Humane Hoax. Welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Hope, and thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah, and you have to add your chapter now to your bio for our book.
Absolutely. Yes. Got it updated. Yes. Thanks for reminding me.
Sure, of course. So, we like to start these interviews by kind of getting to know you. So, we'd love to hear your vegan origin story. Why and when did you go vegan?
Okay. I'm actually so glad that you asked this because it's so important and it's very emotional for me.
Hmm.
So I had been a vegetarian for a very long time, about 20 years. And because, I had heard, vaguely some things like back when I was in college about, oh, animals being abused and this is terrible. And, back then there weren't like all these videos and everything. And so I became gradually vegetarian and stopped eating animal flesh, but I was still consuming, dairy and eggs. And then in early 2017, I saw a video online of a mother cow and her baby being separated on a dairy farm. And
Wow.
any of us who have seen this, it's just such a heartbreaking, tragic moment where the mother is just mooing and running after the cart or the car as much as she can, and the
Wow.
baby is terrified, and it just I could just see it. I could see the suffering. I could see, this is a mother's grief and a child's fear, regardless of species. And I was just like, how did I not know this? And I cried. And then I instantly became vegan and I never looked back.
Wow, yeah, it is horrible, and I just read an article that was going around social media about a man that was trampled, a farmer that was trampled because he was trying to take a dairy calf from the mom, and the
Mhm.
mom just went ballistic and trampled him, and he was like in the hospital. I mean, that's how desperate they are, and to not have their babies taken away from them, it's yeah, it's very painful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they'll for days, right? Or they'll just go around the area where they last saw their baby, like mooing and calling for them. And it's just, yeah, it's
Yeah,
an
yeah,
incredibly tragic thing. And so,
yes.
so I guess, these videos, because sometimes we discuss in the movement, like how much should we use videos and all of this. And there's a really good, debate to be had there. But I guess I will say for me, it was a video that really sort of made the light bulb go on for me.
Right, kind of a graphic video or a very intense and sad video. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. I felt like I guess I had to see it.
Wow. Well, I love that now you have dedicated yourself to this cause. You're actually teaching on the university level about these issues, about animal rights issues, and you're a wonderful writer. And now you've contributed a chapter to our anthology called The Humane Hoax.
Mhm.
And I love your chapter so much. It's called Humane Myths and Media: The Reproduction of Speciesism in Mainstream US News,
Mhm.
and it's really well written. It's so engaging. You have so many good critiques and points that you make. You talk about the absent referent, which is a term that's coined by Carol Adams, who is another contributor to the book. Can you explain what the absent referent is and how it relates to the humane hoax?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Hope. So the absent referent can be thought of as the erasure or the hiding of non-human animals' identities and even their existence through these culturally reinforced forms of denial that prevent people from connecting animal derived products that they're consuming with the living beings who were killed or exploited for those products.
Yeah.
So I think, as Carol Adams puts it, something like, it takes the moo and the cluck out of the, dead cow or dead chicken that
Mm,
people are eating. And an interesting
mm.
case, for instance, where the absent referent might be disrupted for, say, the average US consumer would be, sometimes there are these stories about, people eating at one of these fast food, chicken restaurants, and they find a part that's not supposed to be in there, like a beak, or a foot. And it's like, oh, wow. It's just this reminder, right, that this is a chicken.
Yeah.
And that would just be an example of something that disrupts the absent referent, which otherwise for such a consumer is completely active. They're just not at all connecting what they're eating with the animal.
Yeah, and I think how it kind of relates to the humane hoax is the use of these labels and this language that separates again from the living being, separates the product from the living animal, right?
Oh, absolutely. So Carol Adams, who I have to say is just such a big inspiration to me and to so many scholar activists in the movement. She originally developed the concept of the absent referent in her 1990 book, The Sexual Politics of Meat,
Right.
which is now a classic.
Yes.
In 2013, in an interview in the Journal for Critical Animal Studies, Carol Adams was asked about the absent referent in the context of this, then growing, well, still growing, trend of quote unquote humane and do it yourself farming. And in this interview in 2013, Adams broke down the absent referent into three elements. And she calls them X, Y, and Z. So X is the violence committed against the animal, or basically just the killing of the animal. Y is the concealment of that violence or not, whether it's shown or not. And the Z is the objectification of the animal by seeing them and referring to her or him as, with objectifying terms like meat or industry terms like pork, beef, or just legs and so forth, right? So basically, the short version, so we have X is the violence, Y is the visibility slash invisibility, and Z for objectification. So basically, Adams argues, and I agree, and I have found this in the media that I've looked at, that in the humane, quote unquote, farming sector, X and Z remain exactly the same. The violence and the objectification are completely operative. I mean, in some ways, they seem even worse. The main claim of these quote unquote humane, meat producers is that it's the Y part, the visibility that they are providing. They claim that their main innovation is making the realities of animal farming visible.
Mm.
But in actuality, and this is true to some extent, which I'll talk about in a minute, but they actually still conceal quite a lot. They misrepresent almost everything. And I would just also like to comment on just this idea of visibility in and of itself as some kind of tool or pathway to liberation. So just making an oppressed group or oppressed being visible does not just in itself help them, help that being, or help the public to empathize with them
Mm.
or to do anything to address the injustices that they're experiencing. I mean, one example, and I know it's a very different situation, and so I would take this as a loose analogy, but women are just hyper visualized, right, in our culture, in objectifying ways. And that certainly has not helped. In fact, it has arguably hindered, the progress of feminist consciousness changing. It just kind of normalizes objectification. And I would argue that a similar thing is true of this DIY farming, politics of visibility, where they're just showing like animal parts and the news and all of that. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's
Yeah. So,
fascinating. Yeah. All right. So, well, let's talk about your chapter. Let's get into your chapter because you really unpack some interesting stuff. And I think it's the first piece that you talk about. Of course, your chapter is about journalists and media and how they kind of prop up and support and report on the humane hoax or humane farming. And one of the first ones you talk about is an interview on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and it's with a writer and quote ethical butcher, uh,
mhm.
Camus Davis. Is that how you say her name? Camus. I don't know.
I believe so. Yes.
Something like that. Anyway, so she was in this French slaughterhouse, right? She's describing this on Fresh Air, and they were killing a pig, and they shocked the pig with some electric shock to his head. And then that sent her, I think it was a female pig, sent her into convulsions on the floor. And then they slit her throat. And they said it was the most humane way to kill her. And you said in the chapter, here's a quote from your chapter, she is not only violently killed, she is convulsing on the floor, which only the wildest stretches of the imagination could be construed as humane. I would have to agree with that. So, people, I don't think people realize how hard it is to kill an animal. It is very difficult to do quick and easy and humanely. Really, there's no way to do that. Right. And this is supposed to be like the most humane way that they could do this, but it was anything but. So I wondered if you wanted to elaborate on just this contradiction of ethical butchery and humane slaughter.
Absolutely. So, yeah, for those who don't know, Kamas Davis is a celebrity in this quote unquote ethical meat industry. She was bolstered to stardom with her 2018 memoir titled Killing It. I mean, I could talk about the
Oh,
title,
yeah.
but
Oh, I hate that. Oh.
briefly, obviously it's
Ah,
playing on the colloquial expression killing it, like doing a great job, but
right, right.
haha. But like
Yes, but there's the absent referent not saying he or she, acknowledging that the animal has a gender and a life. Yeah.
exactly. There's
Yeah.
the whole argument of the book
Right.
right there in the title,
Yeah.
in that pronoun. So and I have to say, because having to read these materials, for me it's difficult, like I don't want to read this book, so I mean I was expecting it to be disturbing, but I have to say I was shocked by the level of just graphic violence that was depicted in it. It was actually worse than I expected it to be, the
Wow.
descriptions, even in the
Wow.
first pages. And that's being presented as humane is just, I don't know. It's just difficult to wrap my mind around. So yeah, one of the examples is one that you pointed out, and just the description of it was so callous, and then she describes the way that this old dead sow, as she calls her, was hoisted up by this big mechanical hand, but then fell out of it and hit the floor with a big thump. And
Oh.
it just was
Ugh.
horrifying and so heartbreaking. So, as concerns this mother pig, so we should just talk about her for a minute, since this is the first example that Kamas Davis uses in her book of animal killing. So it's said that she's a mother and that she was done making babies, quote unquote. That's the exact language. So that was her job, making babies. Now she's done making babies. So it's time to turn her into sausage. This is the kind of
Wow.
language that's used.
Wow.
So, and the way that, the way that she's exploited, right? So obviously, this incredibly violent killing is a huge form of violation, but we also should think about the other forms of oppression before the killing. First of all, she's forced to quote unquote make babies, right? So any kind of reproductive autonomy is being entirely violated. And I would invite feminists, to consider these kinds of things when they are perhaps thinking about extending their desire for justice for human women, perhaps beyond the species boundaries.
Mm,
So therefore, she's forced to make babies. She's oppressed by her very biology through many generations of genetically manipulative forced breeding, right? So that she is extremely large, for instance, it is said in the book, unnaturally large because of the kind of human interference in their genetics.
yeah.
And then, of course, she's exploited again by having her death so heartlessly chronicled in Davis's, top-selling, very profitable book.
Mm, yeah. Horrible. You pointed out about their bodies. I've said before that even though they're out of cages, possibly, or out of confinement, possibly, with these humane labels, they're still a prisoner in their own bodies because, they're still caged in their own bodies because of that genetic manipulation and being so either overweight or with, like in the case of a pig, being just beyond what their little legs can carry. Just very painful existence just in their bodies, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I do want to also point out that in the first pages of Davis's book, that the pigs actually are not living outdoors. They're living in sheds, it is stated. So, this is just a little, and this is in like the first 7 or 8 pages of the book. We
Mm,
really get a glimpse into this. Like, this is the
yeah.
most quote unquote humane way that she could present it. And yeah, it's acknowledged they are not. They're living in sheds, just like they would be in conventional farms. So
Yeah.
it's very difficult to see what the difference is,
Yeah.
except perhaps the scale. I don't know the numbers, but yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing about these labels is that you don't know. We don't know where the animals truly were living, how they truly were living. The labels are unregulated. There's there's no way to know. Even if you go to the farm, you're just seeing one snapshot of one day. You have no idea what happened before, what happens after to these animals. So, yeah, it's, they're the labels mean nothing. So going on in your chapter, you talk a little more about Davis and how, kind of staying with this humane slaughter thing, how she slaughtered a chicken and she describes that she just turned the chicken upside down and she says that you can turn off their brains in that position or whatever,
Hmm, hmm.
and that they have reptilian brains, which is such an insult to reptiles who have, not been shown to be any less intelligent than any other animal. But what I really just hate about this is that farmers will so often critique or criticize vegans. They'll say things like, well, you don't know anything about animals, or you've never lived with animals, you've never lived on a farm. And this just really shows that farmers that say they know the animals, that they know what they need, all of that, it shows how clueless they can be about animals, right? I mean, to say that to turn a chicken upside down and you turn off their brain, it's the most ridiculous thing, especially when I think you point out in the chapter that chickens will fight and struggle when they're turned upside down in the slaughterhouse and on the conveyor belts, where their feet are shackled in a conveyor belt and they're upside down and going down the line. They will fight. It's not like they suddenly turn their brains off. I think what's going on is that offering a moment of a gentle hand that will calm them. How much of a betrayal is it that you would then slit their throat? It's just, oh, I can't. Oh my God, I can't. This part just upset me so much.
Oh, exactly. It is extremely upsetting. Yeah, it's really incredible that Kamas Davis was able to make such counterfactual statements.
Yeah.
Like about chickens' brains being turned off when they are turned upside down, with absolutely no challenge or follow up question by the interviewer,
Yeah.
Terry Gross on NPR. NPR, of course, being considered like the fair, objective media of the intelligentsia. Just nothing. No challenge, no questions, even though there have been many studies now recently that have been publicized, even in the mainstream press, about chicken intelligence, about their emotions. Cognitive ethologist Lori Marino, for instance, has spearheaded a lot of this, and it's been picked up in news media. It should be well known, especially to somebody like of Terry Gross's stature. So this claim about forcing them upside down, turning off their brains, is contradicted, like you said, by footage of chickens being shackled in slaughterhouses, and they struggle and they scream in that position and fight for their lives right up until the very end. And
Yeah.
then, of course, like you said, there's also this, what you have so insightfully called the ultimate betrayal, right, in your book. Is it because they have come to trust this person? This is the person who has been feeding them and providing other forms of quote unquote care. It's just so misleading to the public and so untruthful that it's a bit of a travesty that it is allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged.
So you also, in your chapter, you mention a few times about the kind of like tangling and mangling of the perception of humane treatment. And I thought you were really insightful about this, kind of you talk about how medical oversight and techno monitoring, as you call it, can
Mhm.
be seen as care, basically reframing those kind of things that are really invasive and not not really for the welfare of the animals but for the benefit of the business as care, right, for the animals, and reframing kidnapping of babies as care. And in your chapter, you call it welfare from a producer's perspective, which you say, and this is, I'm quoting now from your chapter, does not construct the bucolic fantasies characteristic of consumers' typical notions of welfare. Can you talk more about all this?
Absolutely. So animal farmers are portrayed very favorably in media across the board. They are portrayed as beneficent caregivers, as these kind of heroic figures. This representation ignores that their entire interaction with the animal, even if they are providing vaccines or food or whatever, it is for the purpose of keeping her or him alive long enough in a physiological state where they can be marketably slaughtered or sold for slaughtered at a very young age.
Yeah.
So, one article that I analyze in the chapter is from the New York Times. The main gist of it is that it was celebrating the fact that more women are joining in the animal exploiting industries. And this is something that John Senbon-Matsu, another contributor to the volume, delves into in really astute and incredible, insightful detail, this phenomenon of femivorism. So in any case, this article was an example of that. And for instance, in this article, they talk about giving the animals vaccines as if this were a kindly service. The fact is that they would not need vaccines if they were
Right.
not living in unnaturally crowded and unhealthy conditions, right?
Yes.
They don't need these vaccinate, right? So it's like, oh, it's so nice. They go around and give them the shots, and so they, and then they'll also they really play up the maternalism. They show a photo of a woman farmer bottle feeding formula, what we know is formula, to a baby calf who looks practically like a newborn, but already has that tag in her ear. The tag looks so huge on her because she's just so tiny still, and just that ultimate marker of oppression, that numbered tag. Um,
Mm.
and this is, of course, just ignoring the fact that this baby should be drinking her mother's milk, which is, of course, being pilfered for human consumption and profit. So there's this appropriation of a rhetoric and imagery of maternal care that makes the farmers look, very good, while masking this phenomenon of this, ubiquitous kidnapping of bovine children from their bereaved mothers. And this is just an interesting, like, kind of side thing. So in connection with this article, they also mentioned that there was a propaganda video made on this topic of women farmers called She.I.O., which I actually watched it. Yes, I had to subject myself to these things. So in this video, it's white presenting, female dairy farmers performing chores to a country swing version of Old MacDonald's How to Farm, She-I-E-I-O, the song goes. And according to the New York Times, it debuted on National Women's Equality Day and went viral. So among its choreographed emotional appeals, again, is a young girl bottle feeding an orphaned calf, as if this was necessary, for humans to milk feed calves when their mothers have udders full of milk meant for them. And of course, we'll never see them again. Mm. And I think to the average consumer, the average viewer who hasn't thought about this, like, I think even myself, right? Back in the day, I would have been like, oh, I mean, I don't think I would have been impressed by it, but I wouldn't have thought, I wouldn't have seen.
You don't question it. You think that, oh, well, yeah, how wonderful that they're helping and caregiving these animals. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, it's like very cute because it's like this little girl, this little calf, and it's like, oh, but those of us who like know what goes on behind the scenes, it's so horrifying in this uncanny way.
Absolutely. That, any baby would be taken from their mother and then fed a bottle formula when her mother is right there, could absolutely be caring for her and loving her and giving her the milk that was meant for her. It's awful. Yeah.
It is. And also the pseudo-feminist, branding is, again, this femivorism that John Sambon-Matsu elaborates on is just adds, I guess, to use a cliche, adds insult to injury. It just adds an extra level of, just travesty and injustice to the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually talk about John's chapter in the last episode, the episode before this one, where we have kind of a book club, Humane Hoax book club, and we unpack John's chapter. So check that out if you haven't. So at the end of your chapter in the Humane Hoax, you actually offer some recommendations to media, like how they can improve their coverage, help animals to not be erased, to have less speciesist kind of language and ideologies. Can you share some of those with us?
Absolutely. So one thing would be to personalize non-human animals and portray or attempt to portray their experiences and their status as victims in these systems. Now, this is a big ask.
Yeah.
Obviously it is still very speciesist world, and with how far outside the mainstream thinking that is. But, I think we need to have big goals and high standards and, try to move towards them. But that would be the main thing. So, and here I'm drawing, in part on the excellent work of Carrie Packwood Freeman and Deborah Merskin, who have done excellent work arguing that ignoring animal perspectives is a violation of the press's public service obligation and guidelines. They cite the U.S. Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, which mandates that journalists should give voice to all of those affected by the issues that it reports on. And if the animals are not, affected by this, or the main stakeholders in these stories, then I don't know who is, right? So that would be one thing, not just ignoring them as stakeholders and using them as props in human interest stories. Balancing the perspectives of animal exploitation industry representatives with those of animal advocates, or at the very least, with those of individuals who do not have a vested financial interest in the
Yes.
continuation of these industries. When you
Yes.
read these things, like they'll usually, sometimes they'll like get a quick quote from, someone from PETA or something like that. They'll probably like just maybe throw in like something, not all of them, but sometimes they will do that in. But it is very far outweighed by the number of, farmers and usually very high level industry representatives. The amount of quotes from them
Yeah.
uh, should be balanced out. And just acknowledging that people's food decisions have ethical impacts. That's something that's just left out, right? That any kinds of like, appeals to veganism, or even a mention, that could be something that could be an ethical thing to do. And hand in hand with that, not assuming that all readers are non-vegan. Often you'll see language like, and granted, most people are not vegan, of course we know that, but language like, the meat we eat. It's like, well, I'm not in that group. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Just at least acknowledging or recognizing that not everybody participates as, direct consumers in these systems. So those would be some of my recommendations.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. And yeah, it's so frustrating how you'll read an article and it's nothing but the farmer's perspective. And it's like, well, wait, wait a minute. This person has a financial vested interest in an industry. That's not an impartial voice, about issues. And I think it's interesting because farmers tend to get a pass with this kind of thing. Other industries, like take the oil industry, right? If
Yeah.
there's some reform in the oil industry, we're not going to just hear from oil industry representatives about this supposedly better form of, right? No, we would never do that because we understand that they have a financial vested interest in it. We would also hear from environmentalists and from engineers or whatever, right, about it. It's just not that way with farming. Somehow farmers, they have this, very romantic kind of ethos around them, and they're kind of exempt from thinking that they could do any harm. you know it's very frustrating when you read some of these articles and there is just no other perspective but the industry.
Absolutely, hope, and we would not accept that in other areas,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
you just stated so well. And yes, of course, animal farmers are very romanticized, in the public, imagination, and the media certainly contributes to that. And we definitely see that reflected in these news stories.
Yeah. Yeah, but some industries like the oil industry, really, they're so pollutive and so problematic that it can't be reformed. It needs to be replaced. And we're recognizing that with fossil fuels, and we need to recognize that with meat, dairy, and eggs. This industry can't be reformed. There are inherent cruelties, there's inherent violence, and ecological disaster that's going to come from this. So that's what frustrates me around the humane hoax is that this isn't an industry that needs reform. This is an industry that must be replaced. So switching focus a bit, I want to talk about this before I let you go. You are a musician and have a band called Scarlet Rescue. And I love your videos. They're so much fun. I would say, well, for the barbecue video is great. BBQ Protest, I think is what it's called. And I'd say in that one, you're kind of reminiscent of Joan Jett. Uh,
Ooh, I'll
yeah.
take it. I'll take that comparison.
I love it. I love it. I love it. But then they can get a little intense. It's definitely punk, maybe Sex Pistols ish. Yeah, lots of fun.
Wow, I'm
And
gonna I'm gonna make you my publicist. I love the comparisons.
I love it. Yeah, no, they're great. It's so much fun. I love when activists and vegans find, creative outlets, artistic outlets for the vegan message. And you've definitely done that with Scarlet Rescue. So You recently made a video about a campaign that you've been working on, and it's an anti-vivisection campaign involving monkeys that are used for experiments at the Arizona State University where you work. And you wrote a song and a music video. And this is really a hidden secret about most big universities, right? That they have labs, they're sometimes underground or like way hidden, and they are doing horrific experiments on numerous different species of animals. Do you want to talk about all this? Tell us about Scarlet Rescue and about the campaign.
Absolutely. Let me start with the campaign. So yes, this is something that people should be aware of, that most people aren't who are at universities. Students, for instance, at Arizona State University, we started this campaign back in 2019, and it is a matter of public record. The animals that they have, in captivity and that they are utilizing, for all kinds of painful and usually redundant and trivial experiments.
Mm.
So, with the help of some people who just sort of know how to get into those systems, we were able to get some information about just the number of non-human primates at Arizona State University. And at the time we first started the campaign, there were 63 of them.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, yeah. And again, I don't want to say that it's worse to hold a macaque monkey in captivity than a mouse or a rat or a fish or a turtle. I mean, there's virtually every species of animal that they
Yeah.
use.
Yeah.
So they breed them in laboratories. They also capture them from the wild. This is something that just like absolutely just kills my heart. Like they will actually just go and just trap them and kidnap them, out of jungles, like in these remote areas, and which is also affecting the ecosystem because it's reducing their populations in those areas, just to bring them into these places where they'll never see the sun again. They'll never experience fresh air again. These are beings who live in generally in warm climates, out in the sun, in trees. Now they're in basements with stale air, no natural light, nowhere to move, nothing to do. They literally go insane. The boredom, the combination of boredom and confusion that they experience, which is interrupted only by painful experimentation on their bodies. It's just, I don't know, it's hard to fathom. And
Yeah.
it keeps me up at night, and it was keeping me up at night when I first, because I'd been at ASU for a few years before this really kind of came to my attention, and I was like, oh, wow, I couldn't sleep. And so we started this petition and this campaign. The petition now has almost 5,000 signatures. I believe we have been reaching out to the president of the university, Michael Crow, about it in a number of ways, and are still attempting to do that. And we're going to keep working on that. And we're just trying to tell students about it. Most students don't know that this is going on. And most of them are horrified when they hear about it. So, among the things I did in addition to starting this campaign was I wrote a song, a punk song called Key Card to Hell. And I guess the idea is that these places are so high security, right? Like, no, you can't get in there.
Yeah.
Back in the day, representatives of, say, the ALF, actually were able to sometimes infiltrate labs and like rescue beings. And well, the security is so intense now. So
Yeah.
you need this key card. So it's like, anyway. So I came up with this phrase, Key Card to Hell, and wrote this song and recorded it with my band. And we have this little video where we have this just fictionalized, of course, scenario of us between like playing our instruments, kind of like sneaking up and breaking into this lab. So that was my goal with that,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
try and give a musical voice to this. And with BBQ Protest, which was the first video that Scarlet Rescue released we released it, by the way, on July 4th, 2020.
Oh, wow.
And so right on the 4th of July, which
Uh-huh.
for those of you who don't live in the US or don't know, is like our Independence Day when there's all kinds of barbecuing. So it was very timely. And yeah, in that one, we much of it is filmed at a local sanctuary, Goats with Horns Animal Sanctuary, and it's us interacting with the animals. While I'm singing this song about, I don't want to go to the barbecue, I'm not going to play along, with these harmful traditions and pretend that it doesn't bother me. And that's sort of the idea of that song.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, I am so glad that you're doing this campaign for the monkeys. My roots are in when I was doing activism, when I first started doing animal rights activism back in the 90s, it was anti-vivisection, anti-zoos, anti-circus, anti-fur. And of course, I kind of got caught up in the switch that the whole movement did really in the 2000s over to farmed animal advocacy just because of the numbers. But I am so grateful that there are a handful of those that have kept the energy going and kept the focus on these other issues, because those animals absolutely deserve to be free and not live in these horrible situations like laboratories. And laboratories, it's got to be the most horrific, the most awful existence. I just can't imagine. I mean, not only are you confined like in a zoo or a circus or something like that, but then they're inflicting horrible, painful experiments on you, surgeries and drugs, and you don't know what's happening and you feel awful. And it's just got to be the most horrible thing. So thank you so much for doing that work. And I will definitely put a link to the petition as well as your videos in the show notes. So this has been fun. I have so loved talking to you. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, but we do need to wrap up. So I'm going to ask you our final question. Lisa, what gives you hope for the future?
Whew, such a good question. Um, One of the things that does is some of my students. So, as we talked about during the interview and at the beginning, I teach at a university. I teach mostly first year college students. I teach a general humanities seminar in the Honors College. That's the main thing that I teach. And then I also get to teach an elective every year. And that has usually been an animal ethics class. And I have seen young people who they're worried about climate change. They are concerned about animals. And when they hear about the facts of what is going on in these various industries, most of them respond very strongly to it. And I have had many students now over the years tell me that they have become vegan, because of the class, or at least that they, say in their final reflection that they are changing in that direction, like they're eating less meat now, because of it. So I guess sometimes, some days I'll admit I find it a little challenging to remain hopeful, but I try. And that's one thing that I do look to is like this younger generation, and just the hope that that they'll be the ones to really just finally see the outdated and unjust and unsustainable nature of these animal industries, and just get us transitioning out of them as quickly as we can.
That's good to hear. I'm so glad to hear that the young people are responding and responding positively and hopefully, going vegan.
Yes, yes, as many as we can. And then, of course, I have some students who, at work as my TAs and so forth, who have been committed vegans, for a long time, and so yeah, yeah, just hopefully, yes, this generation will help turn things around.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you for contributing your amazing chapter to the book. And yeah, I love talking to you today. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Hope. I enjoyed talking to you so much as well, and I'm so happy that the book is out, and thank you for including me.
Thank you for listening to the Hope for the Animals podcast, a project of compassionate living. I hope you have bought the book by now. Please let me know what you think when you read it. I have a couple of events coming up if you'd like to join me. On Thursday, June 8th, I'll be presenting online for the Animal Activist Mentorship Group, and I'll be doing a workshop on how to expose the humane hoax. So, kind of geared towards activists, but open to everyone. So, please join us on June 8th if you can. And then on Saturday, June 10th, I'm going to be doing an in person book release presentation in Eugene, Oregon, my new home of Eugene, Oregon. So if you are in the Eugene area and you can join us, please do. That'll be on June 10th at 2 p.m. I'll have a link to the details for both these events in the show notes. Okay, so that's it for the Humane Hoax book series. We have had 4 episodes, including this one now dedicated to the new book. So we'll be moving on to other things going forward. But I will ask you one last time. Well, maybe not the last time ever, but the last time for a while, if you could please be an ambassador for this book. Tell people about it, share about it, write a review on Amazon. Help me get it into the hands of those that need to hear it, that want to learn about it. It's my biggest worry. I mean, really, it's the thing that keeps me up at night, that all this work that I put into this won't reach those that need to hear about it, that want to hear about it. You can help with that. You can help me spread the word about this well thought out, well written compilation of voices. So please do whatever you can to help me get the book out there. All right, as promised, we're going to end the episode today with some music. This is a song from Lisa's band Scarlet Rescue, and it's called BBQ Protest.
Which makes me less concerned about your approval. If my vision meets with your derision, you'll be flagged for removal. 'Cause I don't mind walking on my own, no. And I don't mind deleting you from my phone. We're all born and die alone anyway, like the feeling beings we killed for food today. So I don't want to go to the barbecue. I don't want to go 'cause it makes me blue. Now that you know, are we still friends? Sorry, I can't bend. Before you unfollow me, will ya hear what I have to say? There's nothing more hollow see than looking the other way. You don't wanna hear unpopular opinions, and I don't have a megaphone or minions. I make nice, pretend it doesn't bother me, but that's another me. The real one says, I don't wanna go to the barbecue.